Chapter 6. The clock in Dr. Fox's office said that it was 9:47. I was struck by how much had happened since 3 a.m. I had been kidnapped by Granny, and we had crossed over a state line. We had run out of gas. I had eaten 14, very small, bags of peanuts. I had seen my life flash in front of my eyes. I had met Ernest. I had found a dentist. And I had driven the car. "My goodness," I said to the lady behind the desk at Dr. Fox's office. "Would you look at the time? So much has happened." I was going to tell her about my amazing exploits, or at least some of them. But it was very clear that the woman was not in a good mood. She was staring at me and tapping her pencil against the desk. Her lips were very thin. "Yes," she said. I smiled at her. I said, "Good morning. My granny is in desperate need of a dentist." I expected the receptionist to say something along the lines of, "Well, you are in exactly the right place," but she didn't say anything at all. Instead, she bent her head and started flipping through the pages of an appointment book. I stood there and waited. The office smelled like peppermint and rubbing alcohol. There was some music playing above our heads. It was a sad and wordless kind of song. On the desk there was a sign with white letters that said, "Mrs. Ivy." I thought that was a very pretty name for someone with such thin lips. "Mrs. Ivy?" I said. She looked up at me. "It's an emergency," I said. "Do you have an appointment with Dr. Fox?" "I do not have an appointment because it is an emergency," I said in a very patient voice. "You cannot make an appointment for an emergency because emergencies are entirely unexpected. My granny is in a great deal of pain." "I'm afraid that we are all booked up today," said Mrs. Ivy. Her lips got even thinner. "May I speak with Dr. Fox?" I said. "You most certainly may not," said Mrs. Ivy. There was one other person in the waiting room, an older woman who was working on a crossword puzzle and pretending not to notice that the receptionist and I were engaged in a battle of the wills. That is what Granny called situations like this, a battle of the wills. She always told me that I could win any battle of the wills. Your opponent will be willing to give up at some point, but you must never give up. The trick is to never give in. Be wily, and remember, no retreat. You must never retreat. So instead of retreating, I was wily. I walked over to the waiting room and went and stood next to the crossword puzzle lady. There was a painting above her head that showed some green trees standing together in the sunshine. In the far left-hand corner of the painting, in a dark puddle of shadow, there crouched a fox. I stood with my hands behind my back and considered the painting. Was the fox supposed to represent Dr. Fox the dentist? "What are you doing?" said Mrs. Ivy. "I am admiring the painting," I said without turning around. "I don't need an appointment to admire the painting, do I?" The woman with the crossword puzzle book looked up at me and smiled. "Hello," I said. "Hello," said the woman. "Are you doing difficult puzzles or easy ones?" "They are medium," said the woman. She had a kind face. Also, doing medium crossword puzzles, not too hard and not too easy, made her seem very trustworthy to me. "Are you willing to give your dental appointment to someone who is in desperate pain?" I asked. "Pardon?" said the crossword woman. "My granny needs help," I said, "and I am wondering if you would donate your appointment with Dr. Fox to her." "I'm afraid that I don't have an appointment to donate," said the woman. "It's my husband's appointment, you see. He's back there now, getting his teeth cleaned." "You need to leave," said Mrs. Ivy. I assumed that Mrs. Ivy was talking to me, and not to the medium crossword puzzle lady, but I had no intention of leaving, and in any case, it all ceased to matter, because at that moment, Granny opened the door to Dr. Fox's office and came staggering in with her hand to her mouth. She was howling in a truly impressive way. Chapter 7. Mrs. Ivy shrieked a surprised little thin-lipped shriek. The crossword puzzle lady stood up out of her chair. She said, "Heavens!" The crossword puzzle book fell from her hands and landed on the floor. "Help me," said Granny to Mrs. Ivy. "We are all booked today," said Mrs. Ivy, but she didn't sound very certain when she said it. Clearly, the time for certainty had passed. Granny shouted, "Arrgh! Help me!" She had on her fur coat. Her hair was standing up straight on her head. Suddenly, I saw her like other people might see her, and I will not lie to you, it scared me. How can I say this? She did not look trustworthy. She looked like somebody with a curse upon her head, which, of course, was exactly the case. Granny, I said. And then a little man in a white coat came out from behind a closed door. He said, "Is there a problem here, Mrs. Ivy?" Mrs. Ivy said, "There is a small scheduling inconsistency. Dr. Fox, no need to concern yourself." Granny put out her arms. Mrs. Ivy said, "Stand back!" But it was too late. Granny went running toward Dr. Fox, and when she got to him, she fell down and clutched his feet. What? Well, what could Dr. Fox do? He took her into his office. Mrs. Ivy was not pleased. She had been outwitted in the battle of the wills. She sat down at her desk. Her lips got so thin that they disappeared entirely. It turned out that Granny did not have one bad tooth. They were all bad. That is what Dr. Fox came out and told me. He stood in front of me in his white coat, adjusted his tiny glasses, and said, "I'm afraid that the infection was profound and systemic." I looked at him and thought that he did not resemble a fox at all. He looked more like a mouse. His nose, in particular, was very thin and mouse-like. It twitched in a nervous way when he spoke. "Profound," said Dr. Fox again. "Systemic." "Oh my goodness," I said. I bent over. It was suddenly hard for me to breathe. I have very swampy lungs, and in times of distress they often fail me. Carol Ann took hold of my hand and squeezed it. I squeezed back. Carol Ann was the medium difficulty crossword puzzle lady, and we had become good friends while Dr. Fox was busy pulling out each and every one of Granny's teeth. Carol Ann was a retired librarian, and we had talked for some time about our favorite books. She was very familiar with the story of Pinocchio, and even knew that the cricket was killed with a mallet in the beginning of the book. Carol Ann was going to visit her grandchildren after her husband's teeth got cleaned. She was taking her grandchildren some chocolate chip cookies, which, when she found out how very hungry I was, she was happy to go out to her car and retrieve and share with me. The cookies were in a red Christmas tin with a green wreath on it. There were little spots of raised up white on the tin that were supposed to represent a joyous snowfall. In addition to the chocolate chips, there were walnuts in the cookies, and that was a surprise. Walnuts are not my favorite nut, but they are a good nut nevertheless. I had eaten five walnut and chocolate chip cookies. The Christmas tin was still in my lap. I looked down at it after Dr. Fox delivered his dental news to me. I ran my fingers over the raised spots of snow. I stared at the wreath. It was a very cheery-looking tin, but to tell you the truth, it did not cheer me up very much to consider it. My situation was growing ever more dire. "She will, of course, need to recuperate," said Dr. Fox. "Antibiotics, painkillers, and bed rest. It is quite a shock when all the teeth are removed at once." I took a deep breath. I looked up at Dr. Fox. "All of them?" I said. "There is truly not a tooth left in her head?" Who would Granny be without her teeth? Who could say what you want? You could say what you wanted about Granny. She lied, she stole, she had a curse on her head, true, but she was, at the very least, the kind of person who smiled a lot. She used her teeth a great deal. "Yes," said Dr. Fox, "I thought it best to prepare you." "It will be all right," said Carol Ann. She squeezed my hand again. I wanted to believe her. I stared at Dr. Fox, the dental mouse. I looked him in the eye and said, "Thank you very much for attending to my Granny." I noticed that there was a spot of blood on Dr. Fox's white coat. It was just one little drop, and it looked like something out of a fairy tale, like a pin prick on Sleeping Beauty's finger. It made me want to cry, but then I saw Mrs. Ivy sitting at her desk looking disapproving, and I thought, well, I will not give her the satisfaction, and I did not. And then there was the matter of the bill. That was what Mrs. Ivy said. "There is the matter of the bill. Dr. Fox's services are not free." I said, "I did not expect them to be. You may mail the bill to us." And on the spot, I made up a person and an address. I said, "You may send the bill to my grandfather. He pays all our bills. His name is William Sunder. He is at 1221 Blue Fairy Lane, Lister, Florida. My Granny and I are just passing through. We are on vacation." It was deeply satisfying to lie to Mrs. Ivy. However, the satisfaction did not last long, because Granny emerged from the back room. In addition to being toothless, she looked stunned, as if somebody had hit her over the head with something very heavy. I followed behind Granny as she staggered out the door and to the parking lot. I said, "Granny, Dr. Fox says that you need to recuperate. I am perfectly capable of driving, as I demonstrated earlier today. You can recuperate in the back seat, and I will drive." Granny turned and faced me and held out her hand. She said, "Give me the keys, Louisiana." Her voice was strange, muffled and uncertain and toothless. She didn't sound like herself at all. It was alarming. What could I do? I handed her the keys. We got in the car, and Granny got behind the wheel. We left Dr. Fox's parking lot and went down the road. Granny's face was very white. She was driving slowly, staring at the road in a grim and determined fashion. I said, "Where are we going?" "Do not bother me with small questions, Louisiana," she said in her new disturbing voice. Well, to me, "where are we going" did not seem like a small question. It seemed like the biggest question of all. But then I remembered that I was angry with Granny. I remembered that I was not speaking to her, and I decided that in addition to not speaking to her, I would never ask Granny a question again. We drove until we got to a motel called the Good Night Sleep Tight. It was a small motel with a big sign that featured a giant neon candle and neon letters spelling out "Good Night Sleep Tight." There was a painted sign on the window of the motel office that said, "A good night's sleep is a good thing indeed." This was a sentiment that I agreed with, particularly since I had not had a good night's sleep the previous night, having been awoken at 3 a.m. and told that the day of reckoning had arrived. "Are we staying here?" I said to Granny, and then I remembered that I was not talking to her or asking her any more questions ever again. Granny turned to me. She said, "Go inside, use your charm, and secure a room for us, Louisiana." I stared at her. She stared at me. We stared death rays at each other. We were engaged in a vicious battle of the wills. But after a very long time, I looked away. Granny had won. Even without her teeth, she had won. She was still a force to be reckoned with. I got out of the car. I slammed the door as hard as I could. Chapter 8. Right before I walked into the office of the Good Night Sleep Tight, I saw a crow sitting on the roof, looking down at me. His feathers were very black. "Hello," I said to the crow. He cocked his head. The sun was lighting up his wings. Granny blew the horn at me. "Well," I said to the crow, "as you can see, I am not in charge here, so I guess I will have to move along." The crow cocked his head again, and then he flapped his wings and flew away. I still had hold of Carol Ann's Christmas cookie tin. The last thing Carol Ann had said to me was, "Sweetheart, you keep those cookies, you keep the whole tin." As I said before, there is goodness in many hearts, in most hearts. Granny blew the horn again. I raised the tin up higher so that it was in front of my heart like a shield. I opened the door and went into the Good Night Sleep Tight to use my charm and secure us a room. What choice did I have? The good news is that there was a vending machine in the vestibule of the motel office, and it was stocked with the most amazing array of things. There were toothbrushes with little tubes of toothpaste attached to them, and candy bars with caramel and nuts, and also bags of peanuts and rained bonnets that were folded up into neat little squares, and packages of crackers with orange cheese in the middle of them. The vending machine was such a miracle that I stood and contemplated it. I almost wondered if I was dreaming, but then Granny blew the horn again, and I knew that it was not a dream. None of it was a dream. I opened the second set of doors and went all the way inside the Good Night Sleep Tight office. There were black and red squares of shag carpet on the floor, and also there was an alligator. He was dead, of course, but he was dead in a ferocious pose. His mouth was open and all his teeth were displayed. "May I help you?" said the woman behind the counter. Her hair was in curlers. "Hello," I said. I smiled, using all of my teeth. "My granny is recovering from some recent tooth surgery, and we need a room." "You pay up front," said the woman. She pointed at a sign up on the wall that listed the prices for the rooms in red ink. It was a very emphatic sign. "Well, my goodness," I said after I studied the sign with pretend interest. "Would you like a chocolate chip cookie with walnuts in it?" "Are you selling them?" "No," I said. "I'm sharing them." I opened the tin and held it out to her. She took 2 cookies. "This is a nice motel," I said. "I admire your vending machine and your alligator." The woman shrugged. She said, "It's all mine and whoop-de-doo, and who cares? I never wanted it. in the first place, especially the alligator, but that's how it goes around here. Divorce settlement, you end up with all kinds of things you don't want. You do? I asked. The woman took a bite out of one of her cookies. She studied me. Don't ask me for anything, she said. What would I ask you for? Assistance? Mercy? I don't know. It's clear that you have a hard luck story, and I don't want to hear it. Well, as I said, my granny is in the car, and she is recovering from tooth surgery. I will go and tell her that we have to pay up front. She is the one with the money. Tooth surgery, said the woman. Tooth surgery, I said, and the other tragic things has occurred. But it's probably best if I don't speak of them right now. Yes, don't. I stared at the lady, and she stared back at me. Granny has always said that long silences make people uncomfortable, and that sometimes they will say or do things that they would not normally say or do in order to fill up the silence. However, this was not the case with the lady in curlers. I was the one who ended the silence. I said, Do you have a phone I could use? Obviously, I have a phone, but you're not going to use it. There are probably some people who are wondering where I am, I said. I'm not getting involved in any of that, said the woman. She brushed cookie crumbs from her hands. Okay, I said. My name is Louisiana. What's yours? The woman narrowed her eyes. What difference does it make what my name is? You're still not going to use the phone, and you still have to pay up front for the room. I smiled at her. For heaven's sake, she said. My name is Bernice. I kept smiling. I said, Bernice? Do those curlers really make your hair come out curlier? Why would I waste my time with them if they didn't? Go and get your granny. Nothing happens for free in this world, and I am not going into the charity business, as you have surely ascertained by now. Bernice was right. I had ascertained exactly that. I went out to the car to retrieve Granny. The Good Night Sleep Tight was a very clean motel. I know because I looked under the bed, which is the first thing that I do whenever I go into a motel room. Before Granny and I settled into the house in Florida, we stayed in many, many motel rooms. And I kept a collection of all the things I found lurking under the beds. A spool of thread, green, a ballpoint pen imprinted with the words, Squarts Excavating. The ink in the pen was dried up, but I liked the word excavating very much. Bobby pins. There's almost always at least one bobby pin under a motel bed. I do not know why this is so, but it is. Paper clips. Someone's letter to their Uncle Al. The letter started, Dear Uncle Al. I can't remember what it went on to say, but I was glad that somewhere in the world there was an Uncle Al. I pretended that he belonged to me and that he was the kind of uncle who pulled quarters out of your ear and offered to buy you big bags of salted peanuts and cotton candy on a stick when you went to the ball game together. One time, in Lucas, Alabama, I looked under a motel bed and found the skeleton of a mouse. I saved that too. I am not afraid of a mouse or their skeletons. But when we moved into the house in Florida, and Beverly and Raimi became my friends, I threw away my collection of all the things I had found under motel beds because I thought that part of my life was over. Well, I guess I was wrong. In any case, the point I am making here is that there was nothing at all under the Good Night Sleep Tight bed, not even a bobby pin. The bathroom mirror was spotless, and the toilet had a sanitized for your protection strip on it. The water glasses were wrapped in paper. The Good Night Sleep Tight was very clean, and there were even 2 luggage racks, one for Granny's suitcase and one for mine. Also, there was a phone in the room, but it had a tiny lock on its rotary dial so that you could not use it without a key. Granny saw me looking at the phone and said, Place no calls, Louisiana, as if I could, and then Granny got into bed, pulled the covers up over her head, and became, to all intents and purposes, invisible. I turned away from her and stared at the curtains, which were pushed to one side and were printed all over with little palm trees. A crow flew by. It was the same crow that had been sitting on the roof of the motel office. I recognized him by his shiny feathers. Hello, I called out to the crow. Close those curtains immediately, said Granny. Her head was all the way under the covers and all her teeth were gone, but she still knew exactly what everybody was doing and could tell them how to do it differently. It did not seem to me that her powers were diminished at all. It was very frustrating. I closed the palm tree curtains. There is something sad about palm trees cavorting all over curtains when you are not in Florida, but are instead in Georgia. Why weren't the curtains printed with peaches? That is what I wanted to know. Curtains should be state appropriate. Lots of things, in fact, should be different from how they are. I hope you enjoyed chapters 6 through 8. So, after this chapter, I want you to think about how Louisiana used to keep a collection of the things she found under motel beds. And remember, it said that she threw it away when she thought she and Granny had finally settled somewhere for good, which was in Florida. So I want to start a discussion about, have you ever collected anything? And how would you feel if your collection has just disappeared?